Hey guys, it's Mr. Schmidt here, and in this video we're going to start talking about a firm's cost. So in the last video we talked about a firm's production. Well, in order for a firm to produce product, they have to pay for the resources used to make that product, and that's what we're talking about here, the cost of those resources. To start, I want to differentiate between the short run and the long run. This is something that's going to be very important later on in micro. So short run means a period of time in which at least one resource is fixed, right? Meaning not changing. So in the short run, when not a lot of time has passed, it's hard to suddenly create a new factory, right? Like, it takes time to build a factory. So that factory is a fixed resource. So the idea is when the time period is shorter, you don't have as much time to change those fixed resources into variable resources. And so that's what we mean by short run. So all of the costs of resources that we're talking about in this video are short run cost, as opposed to the long run, which is a period of time in which all resources are variable. With enough time passing, you can build that next factory, right? And so you have the time to change all of your resources in terms of how many you are using. With that in mind, what we're going to do in this video is define each of the 7, and there are 7, short-run production costs and explain how to calculate them. And I'm going to give you 2 ways to calculate each one. Really what you need to take out of this video is understanding that there are many different ways, well, there's 2 different ways to calculate each short-run production cost, and you need to be very familiar with these formulas. Flashcards and practice are great ideas with this stuff. So the first one is called fixed costs or total fixed costs. And yes, each of them have their own acronym, TFC. And so it's the cost of all fixed resources put together. So the cost of my rent, the cost of my insurance, right? You pay the same rent every month. You pay the same amount of insurance every month. Add all those together, you get total fixed costs. And there are 2 ways to calculate it. And again, I'm going to give them to you here, even though I haven't introduced what each of these costs are. So I would just write them down for now. And then once you're done with the video, go back and look at all of them, maybe even rewatch the video, and it all makes sense. So one way is to take your total cost and subtract out your total variable cost. The other way is to take your average fixed cost and multiply it times your quantity Q, which, remember from the last video, is also total product, total physical product, or the production function. All ways to say the same thing. So you got to get used to these acronyms, these abbreviations, so you know what you're talking about. The second one is variable cost or total variable cost, and this is the cost of all of our variable resources. So resources that can change, right? We can change the number of them, like our workers, like how much capital we're using, how many hammers, nails, etc. And so to calculate total variable cost, we take our total cost and we subtract out our total fixed cost. Or we can take our average variable costs and multiply it by our quantity produced. Okay? So again, fixed costs go for fixed resources, variable costs, the cost of variable resources. And if we add them together, we get total cost, or TC, which is the cost of all of our resources put together. And so one way to do this is to take all of our fixed costs and add all our variable costs to that, because every cost has to be either for a fixed resource or a variable resource. Those are the only 2 types of resources that there are. Or we can take our average total cost and multiply it by Q. So if you notice with each of these, if you take your average and you multiply it by Q, you get the total, right? Average fixed times Q gets me total fixed. Average variable times Q gives me total variable. Average total times Q gives me total. So the average times the Q gives you the total. The fourth one is kind of unique on its own, and it's marginal cost. Marginal cost is the additional cost of an additional input. So if I add one more worker, how much additional cost is that worker going to incur upon me, right? And there's 2 ways to calculate it. One of them is the change in total cost, And I'm sure you're not surprised by that because remember, the marginal is the change in the total, right? But you may be surprised to know that the change in total variable cost also is marginal cost. So why is that? Well, let's think of it this way. Remember, total fixed cost plus total variable cost gives me total cost, right? So what I could do here is put a triangle next to each one and make it the change, right? So the change in total fixed plus the change in total variable gives me the change in total, right? I just put a change next to each part of the equation. Now, we know that the change in total cost, I just told you, is marginal cost, right? So we can swap that out for marginal cost. We'll keep change in total variable the same. But what about the change in total fixed? Well, if my fixed cost is the same every month because it's fixed, that means the change is zero. It's never going to change. And so I put a 0 here. So 0 plus anything is that anything. So the change in total variable cost is the change in marginal cost. So you can use either of these to get marginal cost. Pro tip. The last three are the averages of the first three. So we have average fixed cost, or AFC. That is the fixed cost per input. So on average, how much in fixed costs are each of my inputs putting onto my business? And so I can find that by taking total fixed costs divided by my total output, Q, or I could take my average total cost and subtract out my average variable cost. So very similar with the totals, right? So again, these relationships, understanding the relationships between these cost functions, these costs of these short-run production costs is very important. The next one is average variable cost, AVC. This is the variable cost per input. So on average, how much are my variable resources costing me? Total variable cost divided by Q, or average total cost minus average fixed cost. And the last one, I'm sure you're not surprised, is average total cost. Total cost per input, total cost divided by output, or I add my average fixed to my average variable. So what you need to take out of this video is knowing what do each of these 7 costs of short-run production costs of a firm mean, and how do we calculate them, and being able to calculate them when you're only given certain parts of it, okay? And so you will encounter practice with this. I've given you some to look at. I'm sure I'm going to give you more. But just being able to use those formulas. And a great way to start is with flashcards. Practice just knowing the formulas so when you go to these kinds of problems, you don't have to be thinking about what's the formula. So that's all for this video on short-run production costs of a firm. Until next time, have a great day.